Hello everybody and welcome to another Forfar webinar. Today's presentation is going to be all about birds and birding or bird watching, and we'll also take a look at a few birds you'll see during your next visit to Forfar Field Station. We give a very extensive lecture on birds to visiting groups during their stay here that goes over a variety of species as well as some more in-depth biology and conservation efforts. But for today's purposes, we're going to stick to just a few birds that groups are likely to see around the station and on trips. Earlier this week, we posted a mini-sode that goes over some different birds than the ones you'll be seeing in this webinar on our website. So please go over and check that out as well if you're interested. So I think we're ready to go here. So let's go ahead and get right into today's presentation. So before we dive right into the birds, we need to know why they matter and why we should care about them. So birds play a lot of very different roles in their respective ecosystems. So we're just going to look at a few that really stand out from the crowd. Ecologically, three of the most important things that birds do are nutrient cycling, seed dispersal, and pest control. As birds are eating seeds, fruits, grains, other birds and animals, and all sorts of things, they're constantly cycling those nutrients back into the environment through waste and when they die and are broken down. Birds can be great pollinators for plants due to how mobile they are, and because a lot of the times birds do not digest seeds fully, or seeds get stuck to their beaks and feathers and they end up moving them to new areas. In addition to that, a large number of birds are insectivores and eat insects that many of us consider pests and play a similar role to bats. Birds are also super important to the Bahamas economically. Tourism is a huge part of the Bahamian economy, and ecotourism makes up a large percentage of that. In 2014, 3%, or just under 40,000 people who visited the Bahamas, went birding. Birding is considered the observation of birds in their habitat as a hobby. So tourists who are birding in the Bahamas are spending between $300 and $400 every single day, which translates to almost $40 million in expenditures in just a single year. So people coming here to look at the birds, as crazy as it might sound, is actually a huge part of the Bahamian economy. Now we're going to take a look at some brief bird biology and a few easy ways to identify or ID these birds in the field. The life cycle of birds is relatively simple and straightforward. All birds lay hard-shelled eggs. It's a defining characteristic of birds. This image on your screen here shows lots of variety that bird eggs have, and these are all due to environmental factors and the differences in the species, but all bird eggs are hard-shelled. As these eggs are incubated by the mother or the father or both parents and they eventually hatch, the result is a hatchling. Now these hatchlings are generally featherless or have very little feathers. A lot of times they're blind, and they're very helpless for the first couple days of their lives. While that hatchling is growing in the nest and being fed by its parents, we call it a nestling. Now the nestlings have more feathers, their eyes are generally open, and they're much more vocal than the hatchlings. They're starting to look a little bit more like the adult birds. And as it's growing its flight feathers and ready to leave the nest, that nestling turns into a fledgling or a juvenile bird. So we call a bird that has just grown feathers and left the nest a fledgling, and it has those fluffy down feathers still, but is often still fed by its parents, as you can see in that image on the bottom right, for anywhere for another couple of days to a few more weeks. And as those flight feathers continue to grow and its wing muscles get stronger, eventually that bird becomes an adult and moves on. So one of the greatest ways to help you identify a bird is looking at the bill shape. So the bill on a bird is indicative of the feeding ecology of that bird, and it can help tell you where that bird is on the food chain, the type of food it consumes, and things like that. So as you can see from this image here, there are a great variety of categories of bills that birds have in the natural world. At the very top left, with that either crow or raven, he has a long, thick bill with a slight curve to it. That is what we call the generalist shape, so that bird would be good at eating fruit, cracking open seeds, picking up small things, grabbing larger things. sort of a jack of all trades but master of none. And as you move all the way to the top right, that American avocet with that scythe-looking bill, again on the top right, that's a very specialized bill shape designed for grabbing very small invertebrates in the top layer of the surface film of the water. So that bird would not be excellent at picking up and cracking into large seeds or maybe catching insects with that bill. So being able to identify what kind of bill the bird has is an excellent way to get your ID or your identification started. So when we are identifying birds, one of the best ways that we like to do it is use the 6S rule. Now as we go through 1 through 6 quickly, they're going to get a little bit more detailed. So 1, 2, and 3 are going to be more general categories than 4, 5, and 6. The first rule, the first S rule, is size. And this is pretty simple. We split it into sparrow-sized, robin-sized, or crow-sized. So basically, is the bird small, medium, or large? That can get you started on your first steps to IDing this bird that you've seen. Next, we look at the shape or silhouette. So as you can see from the image, the bird all the way on the right, that plover, has long, skinny legs. It has a very long, stiff bill, as opposed to that painted bunting on the left. It's got shorter legs, a more stocky body, a more compact package. So even if the lighting isn't great, you would still be able to tell that these two birds are a different species. The third S is the surroundings or the habitat of the bird. And we ask ourselves, where is this bird? Is the bird walking through the swamp in knee-deep water? Is it soaring high above the treetops and looking down into the trees? Is it hopping along the ground in the open cover? Is it hopping along the ground in dense undergrowth? All of these different birds, as we saw from the bill picture in the last slide, are very adapted to their specific environments. So understanding where that bird is can help you place what species it is. The fourth S is sweep, also known as flight pattern, or basically just looking at how the bird is flying. Birds like finches and woodpeckers will often have periods of very fast wing beats followed by not flapping their wings at all. Other birds, like large birds of prey, like to soar on thermals or fly in a very straight line with very gentle wing beats. A lot of other birds will flap their wings continuously as they're flying. So this can be a great way to identify birds if you are close enough to see them moving away or you don't get a good look at them while they're stationary. Number 5 is song. This is one of the more challenging but rewarding aspects of identifying a bird. Every bird sings a song to either defend territory or to attract a mate. A lot of birds also have a number of calls that they use to communicate to each other with. And a lot of these songs can be very complicated, and it can be difficult even for experienced birders to pick up on what species is singing what song. But if you can learn a couple of general songs, you'll be well on your way to being an accomplished birder. And then the last of the 6 S's is shading. And this is looking at things like, does the bird have a white ring around its eye, or does it have 2 stripes or 3 stripes on its wings? So these are great when you're really close up for the bird or you have a picture to look at later. And that is the basic way that we go through the motions and try to identify birds that we don't know. So now we're going to get into a couple of birds that we have here at Forfar Field Station for today's presentation. These are the Reddish Egret, the Royal Tern, the Smooth-billed Ani, the Hairy Woodpecker, the Cuban Emerald, the Bahama Mockingbird, the American Kestrel, and the Cuban Pewee. And we're going to go ahead and look at all 8 of these in just a little bit more detail. So the first bird up is that Reddish Egret. So this is a medium to large sized heron that's found in shallow salt water, and it ranges anywhere from 27 to 32 inches in length with around a 50-inch wingspan, and it weighs anywhere between 1 and 2 pounds. Now, the Reddish Egret is a pretty interesting species. The first reason for this is because it comes in a dark morph, which you can see here on your screen, and also a light morph or a white morph. Most Reddish Egrets have that rusty colored head and neck and the slate gray body that you see on the left, but a small percentage of the population are born entirely white and carry that plumage with them through adulthood. This doesn't seem to play any real role in sexual selection or predation. So here in the Bahamas especially, we do see quite a few individuals of both morphs. The Reddish Egret is a very active forager, and it's often seen running, jumping, and sprinting with its wings spread out, like you can see in the images there, in its pursuit of fish in the shallow water, which is a great way to ID this bird from the distance. The Reddish Egret is not a very vocal bird outside of courtship displays, but sometimes they do croak sort of like a frog when they're chasing fish. And here at Forfar, during low tide, we often see both dark morph and light morph reddish egrets on the tidal flat and in the mangroves to the south of the station. The next bird for today is the royal tern. These guys stand about 20 inches tall with a 41-inch wingspan, and they're commonly found on open salt water along sandy beaches, especially near bays and inlets. These terns are plunge divers, so they will hover above the water's surface looking for small fish sitting right under the top of the water, and dive headfirst to either spear or grab those fish with that stout, sharp orange bill that you see there. When these guys make their nests, they actually defecate directly onto the nest rim to solidify the edges of the nest and prevent it from eroding away. Now that might sound a little gross, but these terns nest in large colonies on offshore keys and islands where a lot of times there's not much protection from wind energy and wave energy, so this is a great way for them to build strong nests without expending a lot of energy looking for materials in the area. Their chicks will leave the nest after just a single day to form a single little group of all the juveniles on one island or key, and they can actually pick out their parents' voice from all the other parents in the area, which is pretty interesting. And these guys sound a little bit like seagulls, but maybe a little bit more higher pitched. But like the reddish egret, they are not exceptionally vocal outside of the breeding season. And here at Forfar, we see these guys flying overhead all the time, and we also see them perched on anything and everything jutting out of the water on boat days, especially the fishing dock across the channel and one or two shipwrecks that we see as we drive the boats out to our snorkel and scuba spots. Next bird is the smooth-billed ani. These guys are about 15 inches tall with an 18-inch wingspan, and they have a pretty goofy looking bill, but that bill is really great at eating all sorts of things like small insects, seeds, fruits, small anoles or lizards, and maybe even small snakes as well. These guys are super recognizable because they have extremely long tail feathers, they're all black, and that unique bill shape. And they live in groups of 1 to 5 breeding pairs that defends a single territory and lays all of their eggs in a single nest. So all of the group members in a single territory will incubate the eggs and care for the young, but each individual female is a little bit competitive with each other, and they'll cover up eggs laid prior to their eggs with sticks and then lay their own eggs on the very top of the nest, since only the eggs on the top will ultimately hatch. So sometimes in these nests there are up to 36 eggs in a single nest, so a lot of that times these nests are a little bit messy. And the juveniles from the first brood of chicks will hang out around the nest and the territory and help care for the second brood of chicks before taking off and colonizing their own territory, which is pretty unique in the bird world. So these guys have a really high nasally call, and it almost sounds like they're saying their own name, which is pretty distinct in the area. And we often see these guys along the logging road across the street from Forfar, which is a pretty popular birding spot for our guests. And the best way to spot them is to look up high first, because the smooth-billed anis will use one member as a lookout higher up while the rest of the group forages down below. All right. This next bird is the hairy woodpecker. Now, this bird may be a little bit familiar to some of our viewers in North America because we do have hairy woodpeckers in the United States and Canada. The species of hairy woodpecker here in the Bahamas is actually our own endemic subspecies, the Bahama hairy woodpecker, which is pretty cool. So the hairy woodpecker is a medium-sized woodpecker, about 10 inches long with a 15-inch wingspan, and they live in mature deciduous forests throughout their range, so including the United States and Canada. And here on Anjos, we find them foraging mostly in the coppice, although sometimes they forage in the pine forests, which is where they like to breed. Hairy woodpeckers are often seen in pairs, and they'll work their ways up tree trunks and out along dead limbs looking for insects. as most of their diet, up to 75%, is made up of insects, and they particularly like the larvae of wood-boring insects or moths that hide in the tree bark. So a lot of times you're going to hear these birds before you see them, making a lot of noise, pulling bark off of a tree or drilling into a dead, echoey tree trunk or tree limb. And here at Forfar, the coppice behind the cabins and motel units, as well as the trees along the driveways, are all frequented by hairy woodpeckers looking for food. Now we have the Cuban emerald. These guys are very small. They're about 4 inches in length. The male, who is on the right of your screen, is almost entirely metallic green. He has that little white spot behind his eye and a little white at the very base of his belly. But other than that, he's almost entirely metallic green. Sometimes he has an iridescent blue shine to his breast if he just catches the light the right way. And the female has similar greens on her back, but overall, on the left there, she's a little bit more drab. So hummingbirds are the only group of birds that are capable of true hovering and keeping themselves in place with just their wing beats. And they feed almost entirely on nectar, but they do need to supplement their diets with insects every once in a while so they get a good source of protein. But for the most part, they are eating just nectar. These guys can be tough to spot thanks to their green coloration and how fast they are. But here at Forfar, we have a lot of brightly colored flowering plants in front of the cabins and in front of the lodge and also behind the lodge. So generally, we tend to see these Cuban emeralds zipping from bright pink hibiscus flower to hibiscus flower. And these guys are really fun to watch. They're really active feeders. Now we're going to take a look at the Bahama mockingbird. So this is a little bit different than the northern mockingbird, which is pretty common in the United States, which we'll go over in just a few minutes. Despite the word Bahama being in its name, it's not actually endemic to the Bahamas. It's fairly common throughout the Caribbean. They're about 11 inches long, and as you can see from both of these pictures, they perch pretty conspicuously, a lot of times out in the open or on tops of trees or power lines, and they will actively chase other birds regardless of species out of their territory. So these guys are pretty active and pretty easy to spot. And they call them mockingbirds because they're very good at mimicking the songs of other birds and even other ambient noises in the environment. We have mockingbirds on station that actually mimic car alarms, which is pretty crazy. And if you ever hear 10 to 15 different birds outside of your house all at once singing right behind each other, it's most likely a mockingbird. And these guys were almost actually wiped out entirely of the wild in the 1800s because so many people wanted to have them as pets because of their famous singing capabilities. And these singing capabilities are pretty incredible. The male mockingbirds can learn up to about 200 different songs throughout its life. So as I mentioned a second ago, you guys might be familiar with this bird here. This is the northern mockingbird. We also have those in the Bahamas, and I'll put a picture up of the Bahama mockingbird on the right there so you can get a little comparison. The northern is a little bit grayer on top with a white breast and no streaking on that breast, whereas the Bahama mockingbird is more brown overall with more mottled coloration and streaking throughout its body, especially on its head. The northern has pretty distinct white wing bars in flight that the Bahama lacks, but the Bahama mockingbird is a bit larger than the northern mockingbird. The Bahama mockingbird likes tall vegetation and does not do as well in developed areas as the northern mockingbird. And this means that the northern mockingbird is actually outcompeting the Bahama mockingbird in some areas due to being more adaptable to the spread of human development. And they do sound very, very similar. They do both mimic calls very well. So the best way to make sure you're looking at a specific mockingbird and tell the difference between the two is to make sure you get a good look at it. All right, second to last bird here is the American kestrel. These guys are also found in the United States and Canada, as well as the Bahamas, and these are really small. They're the smallest falcon in the world. They're between 9 and 12 inches long, or about the size of a mourning dove or city pigeon for reference. So they're quite small, but they have a pretty large wingspan of 20 to 24 inches. They're incredibly colorful, as you can see, and they hunt for insects and other small prey like lizards and very, very small birds out in open areas and they often perch on treetops or power lines or telephone poles along the road's edge. So we do see these guys fairly often. They will often also face the wind and quote-unquote hover over grassy areas looking for prey. They don't actually have the ability to hover like hummingbirds because they have to angle themselves into the wind the right way, but they do sort of hang motionless in the air above a likely feeding spot. So kestrels are fantastic hunters. They can see in the ultraviolet light spectrum, which allows them to track urine trails of voles and other small mammals like that, and it sort of acts like a pathway to highlight where these animals are hiding out. And because of this, they will hide surplus kills in grassy clumps for times when they can't find food and maybe they're not as successful as a hunter. And here at Forfar, we see a pair of kestrels pretty regularly on that same logging road we see the anis at, across the road from Forfar. And when we're driving to and from locations with our guests for trips, we oftentimes see them perched on telephone poles along the road as well. Okay, the last bird for today is the Cuban pewee. It's a great name for a great bird. It's about 15 to 16 centimeters tall, and it's a very, very small, pretty brown, drab-looking flycatcher. So these guys are also known as the crescent-eyed pewee, depending on which guidebook or website you're looking at for information for them. Regardless of what name you call them, they're really easy to identify from other flycatchers because of their size and their small white crescent behind both of their eyes, as you can see, especially in that left image there. Combined with a crest or a mohawk that is often held upright, these guys have a really distinct profile, and they like to perch almost perfectly straight up and give themselves a little single tail flick every once in a while. Ooh, we got an update. A single tail flick every once in a while to sort of adjust their posture. So they occur in all types of woodland and developed areas from sea level to the highest elevations. So they're really adaptable birds, and we see them a lot here at Forfar. We love having them around because they love to eat bugs. You can see on the right there in that image how wide that bill is on that bird. It really aids them in catching insects on the wing, where they will sit on a perch at about human eye level and look out for flying insects. When they see one, they'll dart out into the air and catch it, and then return to usually about the same spot to eat it. So these guys are really entertaining to watch throughout the day. And as we mentioned earlier, they play a great role in controlling pests in their environments. So hopefully you're all excited about birds now, and you're ready to maybe start birding for yourself or paying more attention to the birds around you. So what do you need to do? What do you need to get to go birding? Thankfully, you don't have to spend a lot of money, if any money at all. It's pretty easy to get started in the world of bird watching. The first and probably most helpful thing for bird watching is a good pair of binoculars. Binoculars are great for being able to ID birds and see birds at farther distances than you can with your eye or maybe your phone camera. And they're really easy to use. So the best way to use binoculars is to find a bird with your eyes first. And as you keep your bare eyes on that bird, you can slowly raise the binoculars to your eyes. It can be difficult to find birds just by swinging the binoculars around and looking at everything kind of magnified. So we like to spot the bird first and then use the binoculars to get a better look at it. The next thing that we like to bring with us is a bird guide. These come in all different shapes, sizes, amounts of detail. You might have to shop around and find one that you like the best that suits your needs. Here at Forfar, we have a couple of different types of bird guides, ones that can go in your pocket, ones that are long with lots of information, ones that are just full of pictures. Regardless, it's a great thing to bring with you because you can quickly identify birds in the field by finding them in your book. And the final thing that we like to bring with us when we're birding is a notebook. This can either be a physical notebook with a pen or pencil, or it could be the Notes app on your phone. And this helps us keep track of things like what you saw, where you saw it, when you saw it, what the weather was, the time of day, any notes you might have about the day or the sighting. And speaking of the Notes app on your phone, we really like to use this app called eBird. Now, eBird is the world's largest biodiversity-related citizen science project, and it has more than 100 million bird sightings contributed each year by its users. So eBird data documents bird distribution, abundance, habitat use, and other trends through checklist data. And people who have this app can create a profile and keep track of their birds and use it as their notebook while they're out birding. It's very easy to use. It can manage your lists, your photos, your audio recordings. You can see maps on it. And it's free, it's easy, it's fun. Now, International Field Studies and Forfar, we're not at all affiliated with eBird in any way, but we do love to use it. It's a great app to get you started in really diving into birding, and it's really fun to use. So, birds are a really incredible and diverse group of animals that a lot of people tend to overlook or not pay as much attention to as other larger animals, but they're really important ecologically and economically throughout the world, not just to the Bahamas. So that's going to conclude my presentation for today. I hope everybody learned a little something. We're going to go ahead and see if we have any questions to answer real quick. So I'm going to get that set up, and I'll try to answer those to the best of my ability. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And yeah, if you have questions, you can, of course, put them in now as well. If you haven't already put them in, I'd be happy to answer anything. All right, so I am seeing a few questions pop up. First question is from Ellen. Ellen asks, are any of these birds endangered? So going back through my list of the eight birds that I went over, the Reddish Egret, Royal Tern, Smooth-billed Ani, Hairy Woodpecker, Cuban Emerald, Bahama Mockingbird, American Kestrel, and Cuban Pewee, none of those are endangered. As I briefly mentioned, the Bahama Mockingbird is losing a lot of its historic range to the northern mockingbird. The northern mockingbird is not an invasive species in these areas. It is just a better adapted bird to the more human-developed areas. So the Bahama mockingbird is not currently endangered, although it will be a bird conservation groups and biologists might like to keep an eye on in the next couple of years as human population increases and we see more development and more of their habitat gets lost. Margaret asks, do all the birds sing? So almost all birds sing. Generally, it's just the males that will sing. Songs versus calls is a pretty interesting topic. A bird's song is what a male uses to defend his territory from other males or other birds and to attract a female and to kind of act as a beacon that the female hears and makes her think, oh wow, that male is really strong and fit and has good genes. Now, a lot of female birds don't generally sing, and there are a couple of seabirds and birds that spend a lot of time in the open ocean that don't really sing to protect territory or anything. But for the most part, yes, all birds do have songs. All those songs are unique. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, it can be a really fun and challenging thing to try to learn the bird songs and identify birds using just your ears in your area. So we'll go ahead and wait another minute or two and see if any more questions pop up. But for everybody who was here and watched the presentation, we thank you guys a whole lot. I hope you learned something today. I hope it was informative. And of course, as always, please feel free to email us or check out our website and get in contact through us through social media. We have links about birds and birding and all that good stuff on our website. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I think we're going to go ahead and end it here. So thank you again, everybody, and we will see everybody on the next webinar.